In the last section, I proposed adding another function to our contract that would allow us to get all this different information all in one function call. Now, of course, we could have done this function call back when we were working on the contract. I knew that we were going to need this ahead of time, but I specifically wanted to run through the process of what we would have to do to make a change to our contract and then redeploy it for our application. So this is something that you might be doing on your own application many times, like updating the contract, redeploying it, and then adjusting your view code appropriately. So let's first get started by updating our contract with a new function to return all these separate details about an individual campaign. Inside my code editor, I'm going to find my Ethereum directory, and then inside there, I'll find the campaign.sol file. Now this is an additional function that we're not going to add to CampaignFactory. This is a function that we're going to add to the campaign because we want to get details about one individual campaign. I'm going to scroll on down to the bottom of this function, this contract, and we're going to add on a new function that we're going to call getSummary. So this literally is going to return a summary of some very different statistics about our campaign. We definitely want this to be a public function, and it's going to be a view function because we're not changing any data inside of here. We're going to end up returning several different values, but we don't know exactly what their types are just yet, so I'm going to leave this parentheses right here empty until we figure out exactly what we're returning. Then inside the function body, we're going to return a couple of different values. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of space to list them all out. All right, let's go look at our mockup really quick, just to make sure that we get all the different metrics returned appropriately. So we definitely want the balance of the contract. We want the minimum contribution. We want the number of requests. And this right here, it says pending, but just to be clear, this is like the total number of requests, not pending. And then we have the number of contributors who are associated with this contract as well. So let's add these 4 metrics to be returned from our getSummary function. So back over here, I want to return my minimum contribution, which you'll recall is stored on the variable minimum contribution. So that's this right here. So let's get down here, minimum contribution. Then we also want our campaign balance, which is available as this.balance. So this right here is a reference to the contract itself. And then obviously balance is the amount of money that the contract has available. We then want the number of pending requests. So that will be requests.length. Remember that all of our requests are stored in an array called requests. We want the number of contributors. So that will be our approvers count variable. Again, you'll recall that we store our approvers inside of a mapping, and mappings can't have lengths associated with them. So we had created that separate variable called approvers count to store the number of contributors we have. And then the last property that I want to get from the summary right here, and we didn't actually display this on the mockup, but I think that I really want to make sure that the address of the manager is available as well. So as the final argument to this, I'm going to also, or the final return value, I'm also going to return the address of the manager too. Okay, so now we need to add our return types to our function right here. So we have a couple of different types here. Let's make sure that we add them all on. And I'm also going to give myself a little bit of space for this statement as well, just so you can see everything on the screen easily. All right, so minimum contribution is definitely going to be a uint. We've got this.balance, which is also a uint. We have request.length, which is a uint. We have an approvers.count, which is a uint. And then finally, we have manager, which is an address. And so that last one will be address, like so. Okay, let's make sure we've got the correct values and return types here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 uints, and then 1 address. And so 1, 2, 3, 4 uints, and then an address. All right, so that looks good. Now there's one other function that we're going to eventually need, and so I think we'll just define it right now. I'm not going to tell you exactly what this is for, but I'm sure you could take a really good guess. So I'm going to define one more function right now just so we don't have to come back and redeploy our contract later. Again, this is for another component that we're going to eventually create. So I'm going to define this as function, and it's going to be called get requests count. And yeah, I bet you can guess what this does now. So this is going to be public, a view, and it's going to return a uint. And then inside of here, we're going to simply return request.length. So again, this is a function that we don't need just yet, but we're going to need it on another component later on. And I figured, hey, let's just define it right now while we are redeploying our contract, rather than have to redeploy it twice. Now, couple quick things I want to point out here. Please triple check to make sure that you've got returns on both the function declarations. It's not return, it is returns. And then the other thing to remember, and this is something I always fall victim to, technically Solidity is supposed to use tabs or 4 lines or 4 like indentations right here, as opposed to the spaces that I'm using. My editor defaults to 2 spaces, so by default, whenever I write code in Solidity, I usually have to go back and fix it. So if we want to be like 100% stylistic here, we should really make sure we've got like 1 full tab or 4 spaces for every indentation level. Okay, so these changes look good. We've now got get summary and get request count. Let's now deploy this new contract. Well, we're going to first compile it and then deploy it. And then we'll be able to take the deployed address and put that back into our application as the new CampaignFactory. So just to be clear, when we redeploy this contract, we're going to essentially blow away or just completely forget the existing CampaignFactory. We're just going to leave it in the dust and not worry about it anymore. So we're going to redeploy the CampaignFactory, and then that is going to be the new version of CampaignFactory that we care about. In the development flow, we're going to freely just redeploy CampaignFactory as much as we wish. But in theory, once we actually deploy our application to the whole wide world, we don't want to be redeploying CampaignFactory all the time. We really just want to have one canonical instance that we're always going to make use of. We'll talk later on about some strategies of how to deploy your application and then come back and make changes to the deployed contracts, but we'll take care of that a little bit later on. All right, so let's now redeploy our application. We're going to make sure that we grab that address and put it back into our factory.js file. Because remember, this right here needs to be the address of our most recently deployed CampaignFactory. All right, so I'm going to flip on over to my terminal. Let's kill our server for right now, just so we're only doing like one thing at a time. I'm going to change into my Ethereum directory. Now let's check to see which scripts we had created. I don't think we created any scripts around this stuff, so we have to manually do our compile by calling that compile.js file, and then we're going to run the deploy.js file to then deploy the contract. So inside the Ethereum directory, I'm going to make sure that I've got compile and deploy inside of here. So I'll run node compile.js. That's going to delete our existing build folder and recompile and rewrite our contracts. And it's going to take a couple of seconds to do. Okay, so that looks good. And then we're going to run our deploy script with node deploy.js. And that's going to kick off our actual deployment process. So we should see, okay, attempting to deploy from blah, blah, blah. Now, of course, this is going to take about 30 seconds or so. So let's pause right now and continue in the next video. We're going to make sure that the deployment went through, and we're going to make sure that we save that address. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.